Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Future of Gaming. As you may have already noticed, this is not going to be the typical one of our weekly podcast conversations. First off, I am not Nico Verreke, and there was no smooth Belgian GM friends to start off this episode. I am Philip Collins. I'm an investor at Convoy and one of the usual members of this podcast. And today I'm really excited to be joined by a special guest. He's a good friend and honestly one of the people that I most respect across the entire Web3 gaming world, and that is Mr. Bored Elon. I would call him a legendary Web3 Twitter personality. Yes, Bored, for you, I will use the word legendary. And also the co-founder of a really cool blockchain gaming company called Boardbox that I'll also let him give a little bit more context for in a second. But yeah, Bored, thanks a lot for joining me today. Really excited to have you. And yeah, to kick off, if you'd be willing to give a little bit of a background on yourself, your experience in gaming and an introduction to the concept of Boardbox, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't speak Flemish or have any sort of factoids about Belgium, so we're going to have to make up for the lack of that in this episode. But yeah, I currently go by just Bored. I've spent the last 9 years cultivating this identity called Bored Elon Musk, mostly on Twitter. Um, really just focused on sort of being a fork of the real Elon Musk and a satirical look at like what he would do in his downtime. Pretty one-dimensional at its sort of origin. But in the last few years, I've really kind of evolved Bored this weird sort of public identity that I've created to be a bit more rooted in sort of the real person behind the face, behind the green face, and behind the Twitter personality. And it's a reflection of sort of my real world background, and a lot of that is in gaming. In addition to this what used to be sort of a side project with Bored Elon Musk, I spent quite a bit of time in the video games industry. Over 10 years. A lot of that time was spent working for a really beloved Japanese gaming publisher. Spent plenty of time in the hallways of E3 and the Game Awards, and helped launch a lot of storied franchises. And so I learned a lot about the mechanics of the gaming industry, what it takes to build a game, what it takes to publish it, to bring it to market, to keep people coming back to it. And it's always been a passion of mine. So not only, do I love playing games, I love the business of games. In fact, I probably love the business of games more than I play games. Unfortunately, right? Because, you grow up and you have less time. And I try
Yeah.
to put in at least an hour a day of gaming, but it gets harder and harder with, responsibilities and all that stuff you have to do. So that sort of led me to the present, which is Boardbox. So I wanted to take kind of Bored Elon's interests, which often align with blockchain and new technology, and my professional experience in gaming, and find an intersection. And so Boardbox is many things, but put simply, it's a tool to curate the best blockchain games. It's to help people discover and identify games that allow them to own the digital assets inside those games. And so for those who maybe are less, familiar with this idea of Web3 games or blockchain games, put really simply, when you get skins in a game, weapons, characters, all these things in sort of traditional games, you usually pay for them or you win them, and ultimately you can use them in those games, but they're not really your property, right? Like the game studio kind of lets you use them while you're in their game and while you're subscribing to
Hmm.
the game, but they're not really yours the same way you own stuff in real life. And so the future of video games is you're playing games and you can buy and sell goods and trade them and accumulate value. And it kind of goes back to the way video games used to be, which is you would get physical cartridges, right? Or CDs, and like you owned that game. That was yours to do with what you would wanted to. And it's kind of going back to that world. And so the point of Boardbox is to introduce people to games that are going down that route, which is giving players more autonomy over their physical assets. And so we launched late 2021, and we've dropped a few boxes, which included partnerships with various game studios, which are either in the process of releasing games or already have released games. And we're very excited about where it's going. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but we're one of the few voices right now, basically in the blockchain gaming space, and so we've been really excited to educate people on the value of digital asset ownership in games, and more importantly, just introduce people to great games they should play.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a great overview. Thanks, Board. I do have to start off by asking you, and I know you're probably tired of this question, but given the current antics happening at Twitter, and your name was the origin, Bored Elon Musk, you got your claim to fame really through Twitter. How is all that chaos impacting you and your brand and your engagement right now? And how's the platform really changing for you?
Well, I never in a million years when I created this account thought that the person that I was parodying would eventually own the platform. I mean, that's just a wild series of events that took
Yeah.
place. Um, I think net positive mostly, in a couple of ways. So for me personally, I think it's upside, right? Because I think the problem with Twitter before was that it didn't really like parody. Their algorithm was not really tuned for it. And I think once Elon started bashing Twitter, it really harmed me personally and my brand with Twitter employees. So behind the scenes, not sure it was super good for me. Um,
Mm,
I think it's interesting that thus far, since the Elon takeover in late October, early November, my engagement rate, my views, all of my metrics have basically doubled. So that's good so far. Uh, that could be because whatever was like kind of pushing me down is now gone, or it's just because Elon's doing a lot of wild stuff and overall engagement on the platform is higher. We'll see over the long term. But for the micro, for me personally, I think it's great. I mean, I am now sort of connected to this person who is the most followed
mhm.
individual on Twitter, and everyone on Twitter knows him. So there's a little bit of a positive halo for me. On the
Yeah.
macro, I think for the platform itself, it's it's either going to be really great or really terrible. Basically, like he's just running a lot of experiments. He's moving fast and breaking things, and some of it I like, some of it I don't like, but I did start to feel like Twitter was becoming a stagnant platform, that it was being beaten by by Discord and by TikTok and all these other social tools. And it had so much potential. Like I truly think Twitter could be the most used like social platform in the world, in the universe, like just like the intergalactic hive mind. And if someone's going to be able to make that happen, it's probably him. And the biggest problem is he's just too busy doing, other stuff that's pretty important too.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that he like comes in for the first 90 days, establishes a lot of great, ideas and processes and whatnot, and then basically bring somebody in who actually has the capacity to like operationalize all of this for the long term. That's the
Mhm.
ideal. I'm not raising my hand to do that. That sounds like a horrible job. But that's my hope. I obviously am very invested in Twitter. That's where most of my distribution is. So I would like to see it
Mhm.
thrive, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, that he's going to be able to pull it off, and hopefully make back some of that $44 billion he spent on this very shiny toy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's funny because I feel like having anything positive to say around it right now is a pretty controversial opinion, for better or worse. I think I'm fully in the wait and see camp where, yes, it seems like there's a lot of fires happening across the company right now, but kind of who knows what's going to happen here, and I can't have too strong of an opinion yet. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic. He will figure it out, and I think I saw today he's going to be spending less time as this goes on
Yeah.
Twitter and bringing on other professional support. So it seems like chaos right now, but you know, Twitter's been core to the NFT ecosystem for the last several years. So it's important that this continues to evolve in some way that's hopefully good for the entire space. But time will tell if that's the case. But yeah, no, it's a crazy coincidence for you personally. So I had to kick off with that question. And honestly, I was personally curious to hear what had been happening over the last couple weeks there as well. Moving back towards the Web3 gaming conversation that you kicked off with your background, I think earlier this year you wrote a really good piece around what makes a blockchain game quote unquote fun. And fun is a word that's being thrown out often in the blockchain gaming world because all we hear is no games out there are fun. I would love to hear you kind of walk through your high level perspective on that piece and what you think of the current landscape of blockchain games in the context of that.
What's funny, Philip, is it just dawned on me that I published that article on an FTX research website,
Yep,
and
it's no longer available. I
it's
tried
no
to get
longer
back to it.
available.
I went back to your Medium
Man,
because it wasn't there anymore.
that is funny. I literally didn't think of that until you brought it up.
Yep.
Well, luckily I republished it on my own platform. I think it was Substack because it was a 4,000 word article and I'd like it to
Hmm.
exist. Um, but yeah, basically I think that um, the premise of it is sort of establishing what does fun mean. And yes, fun is a subjective term. It means different things to different people. Uh, People who are mathematically inclined could have a lot of fun with an Excel spreadsheet and turn that into a game if they wanted to. Others need the more traditional gaming experience. But the point of the article overall, that like what I wanted to get across was how do you use blockchain to enhance video games, right? Because if you're just building video games the same way as they've been built for the last 30, 40 years, and you're
Hmm.
just slapping blockchain on them, that's fine. It does address sort of the ownership issue and give you some opportunities to, let people decouple game assets from like the games themselves. But
Hmm.
it doesn't really make the game more fun. And so the article was kind of an exploration of like how do you use this technology apart from it just enabling people to trade, but how do you use it to actually enhance the game? And so I won't go through all the examples, but like a few that come to mind would be this idea of like DAOs owning game characters. So like if you imagine Super Smash Brothers, there's a highly competitive community around like Smash Bros tournaments. If you had a game that enabled people to, basically own the IP of a particular character and like have like a bunch of people, like 1,000 or 10,000 people be a team owner for a character in a game like Smash Brothers, the same way you would own like a soccer team or a basketball team. That's really cool, right? It's bringing ownership to the masses and letting you have a slice of a really interesting thing. The other is, increasing stakes. Again, going back to competitive play, like imagine a game like Rocket League or Fortnite, where you're playing against somebody, and to make it less like gambling, you're not wagering money, but you are wagering really cool stuff, right? It's like we're gonna race these two cars, and whoever wins, the winner gets to keep the other person's car. And that car was a really unique skin that was super special and rare. And it just makes it more fun to watch for the audience as well. So I think that like thinking about that and really selling those points is what is important. And I think a lot of games so far in the kind of the Web3 space have not done enough to highlight why blockchain is actually making the game better. Because if it isn't doing that, the traditional gamer is just going to be like, well, I'm going to go boot up a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox and go play my games there. Why do I need all these complicated like crypto things involved? So that's the opportunity. And that was the point of the article, was to just kind of like speak to developers, honestly, and to game publishers that are trying to enable blockchain and make sure that they are doing right by like core gamers and traditional gamers, and like speaking to them about the gameplay mechanics and how those are enhanced, and less about the monetary sort of financialization of the games.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that became particularly important over the course of the last 12 months when so many games were just tacking on blockchain or blockchain capabilities onto a really simple core loop and saying, "Hey, we're a blockchain game, come play us." And given everyone is now throwing around the notion of is it fun, it's helpful to have some kind of framework for fun versus just having it be a very subjective and open-ended conversation. So I think that was a really great article that I always really enjoyed. Do you think that the notion of tradability and in-game economies alone is enough for Web3 gaming to really succeed? Or do you think that the first wave of successful games, quote unquote successful games in this space, will have some kind of game loop or mechanic altering use case for blockchain itself?
Yeah, I think my perhaps spicy take is that just trading alone is not enough, because you have this issue where trading in itself is a game that a lot of people play. Like
Hmm.
everybody on Wall Street is playing a game essentially, which is how do I maximize my yield, my percentages, like my trading. And so if that's the game you're playing, it's a distraction from what is traditionally considered a game.
Hmm.
And so is that who your core customer is going to be? Probably not. And then the problem becomes like as soon as they can do this in another game and maximize their profits somewhere else, they will do it. And so I don't think the first few like mega hits in the blockchain space are going to be focused on trading. That might be an element of it, but it's going to be something else, which I think is going to come down to more of like status signaling. So right now in
Hmm.
video games, status signaling comes from like, I'm the top ranked player. I made X amount of money in tournaments. I beat this game in 10 seconds or in
Hmm.
100 seconds, and I posted it to Reddit, whatever. It's like, this is how cool I am. It's not about money. I think that blockchain will enable people to verify that they are, in fact, as cool as they say they are. And then also just, again, increase the stakes so that it's less about like cash and it's more about like cool, rare stuff in video games. I think that's the way it's
Hmm.
going to go. Yeah. The trading will happen, though. I think that's a natural part of it. I just don't like the idea of that being the core reason people hang out and, put their effort or their attention into blockchain games.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree, and I think that's why the notion of fun in video games, I think, will continue to stay exactly as it's been before blockchain ever came on the scene. And I mean, people like games for their own reasons. People are attracted to genres for their own reasons, and there's there's a there's a reason that games like Call of Duty can have 19 iterations and make $1 billion in 10 days.
Yeah.
And people will continue to play titles that they like, and I think there's ways to supplement monetization through the tradability of assets and have more of like a Counter-Strike-esque model, even though the funds get locked up in that ecosystem and so aren't a perfect comp for Web3. But I think, yeah, the core driver to games, I agree, is not going to be the tradability itself. And so that's the standard these teams will be measured against. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're still early on in the cycle of really great teams coming into this space. And a lot of the games that we talk about and know and love and turn into franchises and famous IPs are, several years of development. And a lot of the teams that came on the scene joined within the last 12 months. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline, but I agree it's gonna take some time to get there and have tradability matter.
I mean, that said, I'm pretty darn impressed about what I've seen already. I mean, we
Yeah.
both, have, played in the world of investments and like we see what's in development, and I'm pretty bullish on 2023. I mean, there's some games that I've seen
Hmm.
that are going to come out that are basically something you would see on a PS5. It's pretty impressive what's being built. So it will take it will take longer for like the overall library of games that are blockchain enabled to, go anywhere close to what you can find on Steam or, in the Microsoft store. But like, yeah, we're making pretty good progress. We're not just looking at like, casual mobile games that take 6 months to produce. There's some
Right.
serious like games that are being built with Unreal Engine 5 that look basically photorealistic, and also you can own your stuff in them.
Hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, there's also games that even if they were started a couple of years ago and they weren't necessarily designed to be built for Web3, a lot of those teams now have their attention turned this direction. And so, even if the game at the foundational level wasn't designed for Web3, there's still some cool game mechanics that can be added in leveraging the technology. So I agree. I think I'm bullish over the next couple of years and maybe 2023. I think I'm maybe a little bit more cautiously optimistic about the next 12 months. But I think long term, very excited for what's coming out, and we'll see what happens in the next calendar year.
I mean, you're
Um,
you're probably right. I'm just trying to manifest it into reality by saying it. So,
yeah,
let you be the pessimist and I'll be the optimist.
I'll take that role. But I mean, regardless, excited to see what comes out, and I'm hopeful. I want it to succeed. So maybe I need to start speaking it into existence a little bit more as well. Taking maybe the more pessimistic side. First discussion topic I really wanted to cover with you today was, the big news that's happening right now. We've started to see some of the first big players in the crypto space start to fall off. BlockFi was one that was crumbling before it was very ironically bailed out by FTX, which is now in the process of quickly collapsing itself. And so I'm curious in your perspective, given the general public's trust in blockchain is already relatively low, and people's willingness to make the leap towards Web3 has been relatively slow. How do you think that blockchain gaming in particular will kind of bounce back or rebound from these prominent and public failures that we've been seeing?
Hmm. Well, it certainly has a lot of implications on the gaming market only because, you know, the games that are being built on, chains that basically are going through a lot of turmoil right now. Now, one could argue that the price of particular coins or tokens doesn't really matter. The game can still function whether Ethereum is worth $1,000 or $10,000. Of course, I would rather it be 10,000, but yeah. So I think that the problem, or let's rephrase that. I think the challenge for all of us in this space is that a lot of this turmoil basically has just pushed away the people who were curious, right? Like if you think about the
Hmm.
adoption curve, the very early adopters were starting to buy in, and like I think we were on the cusp of like getting that early majority people who were like, okay, I like games, I like this idea of financial freedom, decentralization. I'm willing to sort of dabble and try these things out in the crypto space. I think those people might have been scared off now, and I think
Hmm.
they'll eventually come back. It's just that it's going to take an extra year or two or 5 years, unfortunately, for that to happen. So that's a bummer. Um,
Hmm.
I am biased, of course, but I do think that blockchain gaming might be the vertical that wins a lot of people back. Like everyone who's maybe scared of like putting their money, into like DeFi or into centralized exchanges and kind of playing around in that world. Maybe they're more open to gaming because that's something they're more familiar with. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm hoping that does sort of help onboard more people into crypto. Um, I do think, though, that what we've seen with FTX and other centralized exchanges is a really good reminder for game makers as well. Like, even if you're not acting as a financial institution or a bank or a lending platform, people have a lot of emotional attachment to their video game items, right? Like, when you think
Hmm.
about somebody who's been playing a Blizzard game and their BattleNet account gets like, frozen, and they've spent 1,000 hours playing, StarCraft or World of Warcraft or whatever, that person goes like and rages, right? Online in
Hmm.
real life, it's very, very painful. And so imagine now how much that would be multiplied if they've also invested not just time but money, or if they've accumulated stuff that is worth thousands of dollars.
Hmm.
So the point there is that don't be fast and loose with your customers' items, your tokens, and their money. And then also, of course, look out for exploits because that's always a risk as well. So yeah, everyone's getting a harsh reminder. I think there are a lot of people who have not been in crypto long enough who don't remember some of the things that I remember, like Mt. Gox and other issues that have happened along the way. And they built a little bit too much trust uh, in
Hmm.
some of these like crypto institutions. And I think that this is going to be a reset for everybody to be a bit more mindful and just raise the bar for for providers and like businesses to make sure that they are showing their potential customers or the customers that like, hey, we got our stuff together, your money is
Yeah.
safe, your stuff is safe. That's the optimistic view. The pessimistic view is that, yeah, I mean, this like broke the back of this industry and it may never recover. I don't think that's true, but some people do.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you there. And at the end of the day, things like FTX, it was more of a misuse of a technology than a fundamental issue with Web3 or crypto.
Hmm.
Maybe there's been some loopholes that have been abused since the fall of FTX that are raising questions around security. But at the end of the day, like the things causing the FTXs and the BlockFis of the world to crash were human decisions around risk.
Yep.
And so I think unfortunately that's extrapolated onto the tech itself. But the central banking system has exposures to people being greedy and people being too high risk. And so yeah, I agree. I think this is an issue of trust versus a pure technological failure of any kind. And so I think that trust can be won, and I agree gaming will be a great way to win that trust back over through great content that people want to play. And so um, I think this is a more of a stumbling block than like an existential crossroads for the blockchain space, but it will slow down the like you mentioned the early majority's
Yeah.
willingness to come into this space.
I mean, like the upside here potentially is that it will actually accelerate the move for most people in crypto to self-custody their digital assets, right? So instead of
Hmm.
trusting a third party, really understanding like how to have a wallet, how to protect it. Because there were all these service providers that were trying to make it very easy for people to not have to worry
Hmm.
about it. Um, but we learned that's not a foolproof solution. And so I do hope that this does lead to people getting onboarded into things like MetaMask and how to use a Coinbase wallet and, how to protect your seed phrase and do all these things. And yeah, maybe you're not going to earn 2% on your money anymore, but I'd
Mhm.
rather earn 0% and keep my money than earn 2% on what doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And how do you view the future rollout of more centralized versus decentralized platforms within gaming as well? Because obviously, the benefit of centralized is there's somebody to answer to when something goes wrong, and whether that's the government or bankruptcy filings, whatever it is, there's somebody that you can go to and say like, I have this issue. Um, what can you do about it? Like, how do I fix this? Whereas decentralized, the benefit is the full transparency that you get at the cost of kind of being at the mercy of your own capabilities. Within gaming at the beginning, it's always felt like centralized would be the spearhead, and things may become more decentralized over time as people are comfortable. But with these centralized platforms having the issues that they're having, do you think that that changes the way that decentralization fits in with gaming down the road?
I think that gaming is going to have a lot of centralization, just because of the nature of how much control, a game studio needs to have anyway. Um, it's not, it's not like this pure financial instrument. But I think that because of the focus of games, um, the companies that are running these things are they're not going to necessarily be incentivized to be fast and loose. They're not lending your game assets out to other people to make more money. Their
Right.
biggest issue is exploits and cheating and that sort of stuff. So I'm on sort of the spectrum of I think that games will be a lot more centralized than DeFi is, or that sort of financial focused products are. Just because like if a game studio doesn't exist, then basically it doesn't matter like if you own the assets, they need to have somewhere to actually exist, right? And so
Hmm.
if a game is no longer being maintained, then all you can do with those assets is just take them to another game where somebody maybe has said, okay, yeah, you can use these assets. But um, yeah, I think that for us to go from a market of a couple 100,000 people who are playing blockchain games to hundreds of millions of people, you're gonna have you're gonna need the likes of, Sony and Epic and EA, like that scale of a business that basically says, we can we can open a ticket and we can help you with this customer
Hmm.
service problem. Um, and there will of course be, games that are fully decentralized and that will attract the super crypto nerds who want it, and that's fine. Like I'll play those games too. So it'll just be sort of a decision that each individual player needs to make. But ultimately, the masses will lean towards a more centralized gaming experience.
Yeah. No, definitely agree on that front. Maybe slightly shifting topics, but not entirely. Going toward the NFT world. I know you're an OG in NFTs. Do you think that what we saw in 2021 in the market for things like PFPs is going to come back, or do you think that was an anomaly that just kind of proved out the viability of digital assets as a whole, but will not return in the same fashion as it did last year?
I it's like when you try to do the steel man, I guess, for this in a down market, it's hard to say like, yeah, it's going to return.
Yeah.
But I think in like during the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of people never assumed that, housing prices would go back up and that stocks would go back up and that all
Hmm.
these asset classes would be booming again. Um, but that did happen, right? And it took, it took over 10 years, but it did happen. So, um, there was definitely some, like, wild amounts of money that were being thrown around in 2021 for NFTs, um, and I think part of that was because there was just, like, less stuff. There were less tokens going around. There were less, things that could take your attention. As that
Hmm.
expands, naturally, I do think that, like, the individual cost of digital assets is probably gonna go down, but in terms of overall volume, are we gonna, reach 2021 levels? Yes, I absolutely think we will. Um, humans have this tendency to gamble and to wanna, like, buy low and sell high. That has existed for thousands of years, and it will continue to exist. Um, it just might take a little longer, but I don't know. I Part of me thinks that, like, look how fast we went from 2021 to 2022. I think we
Yeah.
could just as quickly, like within 12 months, go back to boom times. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. So I guess my wrap up answer is, I think that by the end of 2023, we will be pretty much in the same place volume wise as we were in 2021. That is my
Yeah.
ultra bullish sort of mentality. And I do think it's absolutely feasible. Um, but most people who are, practical investors should not expect that to be the case.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think personally, I do really buy into the future importance of things like digital identity and your ability to flex and represent yourself in certain ways in a digital realm. We spend a lot of our waking lives on the internet, and it is a genuine piece of who we are on a daily basis. And so I think that the first case of the apes and the CryptoPunks was just one way of doing that, of being part of something of showing off. And as gamers, we know that we love to show off in a digital realm, even when people have no idea who we are. So I do think I buy into people spending on their digital identities down the road. I'm not sure if it'll be the same way as it was last time, where you just have these crazy outliers and there's almost like this niche market of high-end NFT trading. Maybe there will be, those people are still out there, but it feels easier to do that when crypto prices are kind of up and to the right, and it feels like everything's actually getting, your prior purchases are actually getting a little cheaper because you're just making money back on what your other currencies that you have in your portfolio. But yeah, I think I'm generally optimistic as well. I think it'll manifest itself a little bit differently. Also, it's an interesting precursor to gaming assets and like luxury high end gaming assets, right? I think that's one of the things that tradability unlocks is, rather than spending $25 on a Valorant skin, if you let me buy, sell, and trade that, I'm now willing to spend $250 on it,
Mhm.
$400, whatever that is. So
Yeah, and in that
yeah.
case, I don't know, it could potentially be a big shift of uh value exchange, right? So like a lot
Hmm.
of money in video games today goes directly to the game publisher and then
Yeah.
indirectly to advertisers and, basically like things that onboard or attract new players. Um like Call of Duty alone, I've read spends $500 million a year on marketing and advertising to get people to
Hmm.
play for free.
Yep.
If some of that money shifts to players themselves who are trading assets amongst themselves, I think that's fine. That doesn't necessarily mean new money was created. It just means it's going from one party to another, and I'm okay with that scenario.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I feel like that's the calculation that a lot of the big players are still trying to figure out is, does it actually make sense for us to enable this value to be exchanged through people? Because, the total volume of trading can go up exponentially if it's going peer to peer, but the residual that's still remaining in the hands of the content creators, I feel like that's the struggle right now of, can this actually make us more money, or is it a better player experience that's gonna give us a little bit of a discount on our sales? If I can't sell the same $20 skin a million times, like how do I offset that loss? Um,
Yeah,
who knows?
I mean, I look at what happened with the music industry, and they tried to milk that game for a very long time of like, you can download this one song and pay 99 cents or buy a CD. But eventually, streaming services like Spotify, basically, pointed out that consumers want access to all this music. They're willing to spend
Mhm.
money on it, but they're not willing to spend as much money on it. So you're going to have to shift your business model and make, money in other ways, whether it's merchandise and concerts and all that stuff. And that's just what happened. And so, yeah, I mean, I think game publishers are going to have to get used to making money in different ways. I'd like to think that overall, in the long run, they will make more by
Mhm.
enabling, players to have more of the value exchange. Um, but that might not happen, and I think that's okay. Like my goal is to be the advocate for players, not for traditional game publishers who,
Mhm.
often are just extracting value from players and not really um, giving them enough entertainment back to justify the money that the players are spending.
Yeah. No, no, a phrase I used to use all the time, especially in the bull market of Web3, was talking about evolving consumer expectations, and eventually, even if it isn't best for the publishers, it might be necessary for them to meet the players where they are and what they expect from their gaming experience. And I think all it's going to take is a couple of popular titles to make people realize, oh, like that old model kind of sucks as for me as a player. And it like once we got exposed to it, it was hard for me to convince myself to buy traditional like weapon skins in Valorant or like a League cosmetics or Call of Duty shop items because you know what those items are and you know how fleeting they are as soon as you walk away from that game. And it is a
Yeah.
mental hurdle that comes into play.
I mean, I remember when video games started to default to being digital downloads instead of like buying the game at, Best Buy or GameStop. And at first, a lot of people didn't like it. They they felt like, okay, I'm spending $60. I want like the cover art. I want the nice thing to put on my shelf. But then, what started to happen was like there was only a certain number of copies of the game available, and you had to wait 3 weeks to get new items. And you're like, I'll just download it. That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't own like this physical thing anymore, but this is really convenient, and I'm going to do it. And so that
Mhm.
became the norm, right? Like no game publisher now is not going to release their game as a digital download. So, I mean, it took time, but it happened, and I think that very much the same way it'll happen with blockchain as well, where people will be like, okay, yeah, there's some downsides, there's some upsides. Overall, I think this is something that we should probably, invest our time into.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think on the topic of distribution, that's the last topic I really wanted to hit on with you because you're leading a Web3 asset distribution company today. And I'm curious your thoughts on the future of a Web3 game distribution. We see a ton of pitches around the Steam for Web3, for example, and how digital downloads should be done for blockchain specific titles. What do you think about that? Do you think that Web3 games need their own distribution platform, or do you think it'll all kind of blend together in the end?
I mean, I certainly would love to see Web3 games distributed via, the Epic Store or Steam.
Mhm.
Um, it's starting to sort of happen in small cases. But yeah, I do think that Web3 games do need their own distribution platforms, and not necessarily competing with like traditional game distribution platforms like Steam, but rather like competing against marketplaces, right? So when you think about NFTs and game items typically are NFTs, um,
Mhm.
they're basically interwoven on places like OpenSea or Rarible with art and collectibles, all these different types of products. And it's very, very messy. And the biggest problem is that it doesn't like none of those marketplaces do a very good job of selling the games. They're a good
Mhm.
place to find the item for the lowest price if you already know you want it.
Mhm.
But it's not good about discoverability. It's almost like Amazon. Like, yeah, I mean, Amazon will try to like serve you up stuff you should buy, but you kind of go to Amazon already knowing what you want to buy. And
Mhm.
so with Boardbox, I mean, we're trying to focus more on signal versus noise, which is we're not trying to compete with Steam. We're not trying to compete with OpenSea. We're
Mhm.
not going to show you everything. We're going to show you, select items, kind of like a boutique store that you should potentially, pay attention to and learn more about. And so it's definitely more of a premium product because of that, because you're trading your money for time, right? We're doing some of that work for you. But overall, I definitely don't like the idea of blockchain game assets or digital assets for games being mixed together with everything else because it's not a good experience for the player. Like I like the idea of a GameStop in real life because it's really focused on games. Like
Yeah.
when you go to find video games at like Target or Best Buy, you're looking at stuff that's next to dryers and TVs and magazines, and it's kind of like that's fine. This is like the section of the store, but it's not tuned for gaming. And so I think you need places where it's really highlighting like why is this game great? Why is it fun? Where can I learn more about it? And I'm not being distracted by all the other products that have nothing to do with gaming that surround it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do feel like it'll evolve to that over time. I think one thing that's been cool about seeing games on the Epic Game Store, for example, is just titles like a Grit being side by side with Rocket League
Hmm.
and that association of, oh, these are just video games and I can get them here just like I can get all my other video games from a platform like this. I think there's something powerful from a consumer psychology standpoint there. But yeah, no, definitely hear you that at some point you'll need to have some form of tailored user experience for where you not only find games but also launch them. And so maybe we will see one of these Steam for Web3 work. I think that hopefully over time, I think my vision of the future and hopefully one that aligns with yours, given the space we're both in, is the notion of blockchain gaming kind of fades away, and blockchain becomes a part of a tech stack for video games that people know and love. And I think that's a great outcome. And so, who knows? Maybe the future of distribution platforms will be Web3 because games are inherently Web3 themselves, or maybe they'll just exist side by side because no one knows the difference of if they're paying on some kind of fiat platform or buying an on-chain asset in a stable coin with a conversion that's happening in the back end that you
Yeah,
never
I
know or
mean,
find out about.
abstract all of that away. I don't care, right? I just want to
Yeah.
play my game as fast as possible. And like people have been willing to overcome a lot of the technical requirements of games for a very long time. If you like told your friend, "Hey, I want to play StarCraft," and like I don't have Battle.net, I don't have all this things set up on my
Mhm.
computer. It's a little bit of a chore, right? And so, but if it's a good enough game, you'll do it. And so it's the same with the space that we're in. And yeah,
Yeah.
like you, I'm very, bullish on it. I think that on my end, I'm trying to be a patient educator. And, even when people are really skeptical or, just misinformed about the space, I try to show them the really simple upsides of digital asset ownership. And if they still hate what we're, talking about, then that's okay. Maybe they'll come back in 5 years. I'll focus on people who are a little bit more open to it for now.
Yeah. No, definitely. Well, I do think you're a great educator in the space. It's part of the reason I wanted to speak with you today. I think you do a lot of good work around, you know, letting people know what content is out there and curating it, and also just being a good and reasoned voice for the future of Web3 games. So definitely appreciate you joining me here today. I think that's all the topics I wanted to talk about. Anything else from your side, Board?
No, I mean, thanks so much for having me. Always a great conversation. Would love for anyone listening to check out Boardbox, which is boardbox.io is our website. Lots of information there. And I always encourage people like tweet at me at Bored Elon Musk on Twitter if you have any questions about gaming in general, about Boardbox, anything I'm working on. I'm pretty good about responding to people, so please do reach out.
Awesome. No, appreciate you spending the time with me here, Board. Always a great conversation when we get together. Listener, if you made it this far, thank you for joining us. I personally really enjoyed the conversation. But for now, that'll wrap us up here, and we'll see you in the next one. So have a good one, Board, and we'll see the listeners next week.